Hello and welcome to this course, which is dedicated to the opening called Scandinavian Defense. Actually, it has another name. In some countries it has known as a center counter defense or center counter game. But I think majority of the chess players know it as a Scandinavian defense, and it arises after e4, and black is playing immediately the move d5 without any preparation. This move was first played a long time ago, I think around 15th century there is a recorded game, but black started to play it maybe more often in the end of the 19th century. There were some players who actually put some effort into the developing of this opening, and they found out that it's not so bad, because initially people thought that it's a terrible move, d5, since after pawn takes d5, queen takes d5, white can win a tempo by playing knight c3. But it turned out that black has decent chances, and we're going to see in this course probably all the options for black. I will give you a choice between many different variations for black, and I want to show you that this opening is playable for black. So in the first chapter, I want to show you maybe some of the rare lines which you should know. Of course, you should know all the main lines, but what to do if your opponent plays something which is not so famous and not so popular, you should be prepared anyway. It will be pity to know all the main things and don't know what will happen after 3 moves in some sideline. So now I want to show you the moves in which white is not taking on d5. So what else he can do? The pawn is under attack. I will not show you some gambits like d4. Of course, then you can just take the pawn. Also, after knight f3, you can take the pawn. After every move, basically, it's good to take the pawn. After d3 as well, you can take the pawn on e4, and then after pawn takes, you can just exchange the queens. The endgame is at least equal for black. So the two moves which have some sense are the move e5 and the move knight to c3. And let's start with the move e5. Obviously, in this case, white wants to keep the pawn structure like this, and now he is aiming to push later d4 if possible. So now there are many deviations for black which can turn the game into another opening. For example, if black plays e6, after d4, we will switch to French defense, and this line is called the advanced line. Now black plays c5, white plays c3, and so on. There is a lot of theory in this line. If you don't play e6, what else you can do? If you play c6, this move looks a bit strange, but now we can go actually to another opening called Caruana, which usually arises from e4, c6, d4, d5, and then white pushing e5. But now there is no need to play c6 because we already managed to play d5. Actually, it's very interesting that in these openings, in the French defense and in Caruana, black is making a preparation to push d5. So first he plays e6 or c6, and on the second move he plays d5. So usually his plan is to have a pawn on d5 in any case. She could be supported from the e pawn or from the c pawn, because in both cases, when white takes on d5, black wants to have another pawn and to take with the e pawn from e6 or with the c pawn. But in Scandinavian, black actually has completely different plan, which is just to trade the d pawn for the e pawn. Okay, let's go back to this line e5. If we don't want to go into the French or Caruana, then we have few options. We can play knight c6. Actually, once again, it's going into another opening, which is called, okay, this is after e4, knight c6 first move. This is a very rare opening, d4, d5, and white is playing e5. And now black has many moves. Usually he goes bishop f5 or f6, but this is also not, I think, the best option. You can play also bishop f5. So this could be a very good version of the French defense. Let's say if white plays normal moves in the French defense. Now the difference is that the bishop is not on c8, but he is on f5, and this is a big improvement from the French defense, because those of you who play French, they know that usually this is the worst possible piece, and very infamous, the French bishop they call it. So now when the bishop is on f5, this is a much better version for black, and he has equal game. But even maybe better is, I think, to meet the move e5 with the move c5. Because now it's not so simple for white to push d4. If he plays immediately, black can just take it. So there are two main options for white: to push f4, because he needs to support the pawn on e5, and then black can just develop normally with knight c6, even without bishop f5, even maybe bishop g4 is more active, and then the same plan, e6, castle for example, and this knight can go to h6, to f5, bishop e7, this is a typical French plan, and black has a very good position. Now if white tries to push d4, he can prepare it with c3. Of course now black can simply play d4, and then after knight f3, knight c6 for example, this is also quite a good line for black. But even if you play, let's say, knight c6 and let white push d4 to go into some kind of French, once again you have this advantage to develop now the bishop on f5, and this is the same variation, knight c3 for example. Now you can play bishop b4 if you want, or queen b6. I think this is the most popular move, and then knight e7 and castle, and once again it's an equal game. So more or less I think those are the main options in the move e5. What to do if white plays knight to c3? Now you can switch in few other openings as well. Let's say c6, again is switching to Caruana, where white can play for example d4, and this is one of the main lines in Caruana. If you don't want to play this opening, instead of playing c6, you can play e6. In this case, after d4, it will revert to French defense once again. So black can play either bishop b4, either pawn takes e4, either knight f6, for example. But you have to know another opening, which is French defense. Now, if you don't want to study additional French and Caruana, you can play knight f6. But this will revert the game into the Alekhine defense, which arises after e4, knight f6, and then white is not playing e5, but he plays knight c3, and black is playing d5. So now in this opening, once again, there are many deviations. Now white can take on d5, or he can push e5, and after e5 there are 3 or 4 possibilities: knight to e4, knight to g4, knight to d7, d4 is also an interesting move, and here also white has many options like knight e2, or to take the knight, and then black can take on c3. Now white can take both pawns, but usually he takes this pawn. Now black has to take this with check, otherwise he will lose the pawn. And this is one very common line here. Okay, queen takes I think is more popular. And this endgame is I think equal. Black don't have any problems. For example, something like this. There are many games in this line. Any bishop b5, bishop d7. Another line in this deviation of Alekhine could happen after knight to e4 instead of d4, and now white can take, so black takes with a pawn. Now this pawn is weak on e5, so white usually plays d4, and black has to take en passant. Bishop takes d3, and now black has comfortable play because he has to attack this pawn and white has to defend it, but black has this very active idea, bishop g4, to pin the knight and to attack the pawn on e5. And if you try to defend it with the queen or with the bishop, even queen d5 is a good option, attacking the knight. And now black wants to take on f3 and double the pawns. So this is also a good line, knight e4. So that's why usually, instead of taking on e4, white is playing, if he plays d3, of course you will take on c3. Sometimes he plays this clever move, knight e2, trying to win the knight if possible. And okay, he wants to play d4, maybe an f3. And now black has many moves, but I think d4 is probably the best. If now white plays d3, black will go back to c5, and then this pawn is a little bit weak. So white usually plays c3. Now you have to be careful not to take on c3, because he has this check, queen a4 check, and you're going to lose the knight. So usually black plays knight to 6, pawn takes d4. Now once again this is losing because of this check, but black plays here the move knight to g5, and then he wants to go to e6 to capture the pawn on d4. So this is a little bit more complicated, but also a very good line for black. If you retreat on d7, the game can still switch to French defense after e6. Now we go into one of the lines in French defense. So basically, when white is playing knight c3 or e5, you can move many times into a French defense or in Caruana or in some other openings. But there is a move actually who is not leading to any other opening after knight to c3. This is first the move pawn takes e4, and now knight e4. It looks like Caruana still. Black can play, for example, c6, and d4 can switch to Caruana. Even if black is willing to lead the game to the French defense, he can play e6. And again, d4 is French defense. But there is no reason for you to play such a passive moves now, like c6 or e6. You can go, for example, bishop f5, which looks like Caruana a little bit. Now d4, c6 is leading to Caruana, but once again, like I said, you can play something else like knight f6. So usually white plays knight f3, and he has the idea to jump on e5 in many lines. So black can play knight d7, and if white plays bishop c4, I think you have to develop further knight without pushing the pawns. And now depends what white will do. If he plays d3, you can just play e6. So this is not so dangerous for black. Then the plan is bishop e7, let's say castle bishop e7, and black also make castle, and the game is completely equal. But if he tries to play something like Caruana, let's say d4, now the difference is that you don't have to play c6, but you can play immediately c5, or if you want, you can prepare it, let's say with bishop e7 and castle, and at some moment black will play c5. So comparing to Caruana, he is one tempo ahead. So this is a good option. Another good line, I think, is after knight takes e4. You can go as well, the same ideas like in Caruana. You can play knight d7 with idea knight f6. Let's say knight takes, which is very good for black. You can play as well even knight f6 immediately. And then, okay, black has double pawns, but it's very difficult for white to use this double pawns because black has a very easy game. He wants to play rook e8 and then bishop to g4, knight d7, c6, queen c7, rook d8. And okay, white has some slight advantage because of the pawn on d4, but it's very difficult to break this pawn structure. But I still would not recommend, because I suppose you want to play for a win with black. And in this case, you can try the move e5. And now usually white plays bishop c4. You can play knight c6, but not knight f6, because then maybe white can go knight g5 to attack the pawn on f7. So knight c6, d3. Once again, not knight f6 maybe because of knight g5, but first bishop e7, and only then you have to play knight to f6. And okay, if white takes, black takes with the bishop, and I think this is a very good position for black. After 7 moves, 8 moves, you have already at least equal game, and even I think this pawn is more active than the pawn on d3. Black also has this outpost on d4. He can pin the knight on g4. So this is a very pleasant position for black. And finally, let's see another line. After knight c3 second move, black can also push d4. Instead of e6, c6, knight f6, pawn takes, just attack the knight. Probably this is the most natural reply. And now, for example, it will be very risky to play knight d5 for white. First of all, because after c6 and then e5, black has a good position. Let's say now bishop d6. This knight is a bit awkward on d3, but even, actually, you can play immediately e5. And now in many games, white were unaware of the intention of black, and they played knight f3. And then after c6, simply white is losing the knight. And if he wants to keep the knight, probably he should play move like c3, so he can get the square b4. But I don't think this is a dream position for white to play 5 moves, and after 5 moves to have knight on b4, because now after knight f6, black has already maybe slight advantage. That's why after d4, this I think is a mistake. Bishop b5 check is losing because of c6, and now both pieces are attacked. So the only move is knight e2. And now there are probably 2 main ideas for black: to push e5 or to push c5. In case of e5, usually white plays knight to g3 to make space for the bishop, and now he wants to play bishop to c4. So you have to prevent it, and I think this is the best move to stop bishop c4. Knight f3, and now if you play knight c6, he will pin your knight. So most people prefer to play f6. And now if white plays d3, he will close this bishop, so then you can play c5 and knight c6, and black has already advantage. So if white wants to activate the bishop, he has to give this check with the idea to bring the bishop back and to trade it on b3. Now black can play knight d7 or knight a6, but both moves are with the same idea. Sometimes to go knight c5, although you can simply take on b3, but I think this is a good enough move. This knight is in good position on e6, and after d3, for example, queen d7, I don't see any problems in black's position. So I think this is a very good line to play d4 and then e5. If you don't want to play e5, you can play c5 here. So the idea is a little bit different. In this case, you can play knight c6, but now you don't want to play e5, but actually there is a very interesting plan, which is to chase this knight by playing h5, with the simple idea to push h4. And if white plays h4, then you have this square g4, so you can bring the bishop on g4 to pin the knight. And if he moves the bishop to c4 or b5, this pin will be very annoying in the future. So usually they play bishop e2, but then the bishop is not so active. So now black can just develop e6 and then bishop to d6 to attack the knight, maybe queen c7. This knight is not in the best position. So this actually is also a good option. Instead of playing e5, c5 is also a fine idea for black. And after I showed you all these possibilities, I think it's time now to see some real games. And the first game which I want to show you is between two players. One of them is very famous. He is one of the best players from Netherlands, Luc van Velle, and he played this game a few years ago. And okay, the move order was slightly unusual. White played first knight c3, d5, and then he played e4. So now Van Velle chose one of the lines which we have seen in the preview, d4. And I told you that knight e2 is probably the best move. Black is playing e5. So actually now the move d3 could lead to some kind of maybe reversed King's Indian defense. If white plays d3, g3, bishop g2, there are some ideas which could lead to kind of reverse King's Indian, but usually he plays knight g3. And I said that this is good idea to go bishop c4 and then to play d3. So black usually plays bishop to e6. And in this game as well, Van Velle went for this move, bishop e6. Knight f3. And black is playing f6 because otherwise, if knight c6, it will be bishop b5. So f6 is with the idea to defend the pawn on e5, but also to prevent the possible knight g5 moves in the future after white plays d3. Because if you allow, let's say in some moment, white to play d3 and knight g5 and to exchange this bishop, it will be good for white to have a pair of bishops, and also from black's point of view, when you have all the pawns on dark squares, if you trade the light square bishop for the knight, it will be a big mistake, because then the light square white bishop will arrive to this diagonal, and he will bring a lot of damage. So now white is playing c3. We have seen only the move bishop b5 in the preview, bishop a4, bishop b3, but c3 is another idea. Now black is playing c5, and in this case, after this check, obviously black cannot push c6 now, but knight c6 is completely fine. Black is developing his pieces, and now white decided to castle. And now black has many different plans how to deal with the spin. He can play knight e7, queen d7, rook c8, but it would be a mistake to play the move a6, because I think white, he wants to take on c6, so there is no need to force him to lose one move to play a6. And Van Velle was not afraid of bishop takes c6, but he is not inviting this move, so he prefers to develop. So he goes bishop to d6, because he wants to play knight to e7 without closing the route of the bishop from f8. So first the bishop on d6 is developed, defending all the pawns just in case, and then black wants to play knight e7. So white took on d4, black took, and this is the last moment in which white could take the pawn on c6 if he wanted to change the pawn structure and to force black to take with the pawn. But he played d3, and after this, after knight e7, already it would be a mistake for white to take in any moment, because he has to try to keep this bishop, and if possible to move it back to this diagonal to exchange the bishop on e6. Now white has played knight h4, which is also a typical move in these circumstances, with the idea to play either queen h5 check or knight f5 to try to use this outpost. And now if black plays g6, then white can play bishop to h6, and now it will be difficult for black to castle. So there is no time for moves like g6, and black simply decided to castle. And here white has also many plans. He can play moves like bishop d2, rook c1, queen e2, or he can play a3, b4, or he can try to push f4, or maybe knight f5. But he preferred to play the move bishop c4, which overall the idea is correct. to trade the light square bishops. But I think it would be maybe wiser to lose one move to go a4, b3, because now when black takes, the pawn structure is changing, and now this pawn becomes defended pass pawn. So now every endgame should be better for black. You could argue, of course, that now since black has this pawn structure, all the pawns on dark squares, his bishop is weak, and because white has his pawns on light squares, his bishop is more maybe useful. But I don't think that this bishop has some big future on this diagonal. He can only go to d2, and when he goes to d2, if black is willing, he can prepare some bishop before idea to trade it. And here black had actually a very clever strategy. Instead of trying to prevent this move with g6 to expose his king, he simply invited white to come and exchange two pieces, because, like I said, he will be quite happy from the endgame. So he went to rook f7. Now white went on f5. Black took. White took with a knight. And now he wants to exchange the other knight as well, giving white the option to take the knight if he wants, or to take the bishop. In both cases, black will be happy because he don't have any problems, his king is safe, his pawn structure is superior, and white here understood that actually it's not good to exchange so many pieces, so he decided to go back to g3, but the knight on g3 is not so active. And now black simply has to develop his pieces, the queen and the rook, so he went queen to c7, which is also against some f4 ideas, and meanwhile the pawn is under attack, so white has to lose some move to defend it. He plays queen to d3. I suppose he didn't like b3 because of some bishop b4 ideas, and then bishop c3, so he moved the queen, rook to d8, bishop to d2, and black is playing the move a5, trying to slow down the potential move b4 who is coming, and also maybe to prepare bishop b4 in the future. Rook a c1 is with some idea at c5, and black is defending against this possible threat. And now white is playing the move a3, and this is an important moment in the game because he wants to push b4 and to try to use his extra pawn on the queen's flank, because here white has 3 against 2. So when you face such a move a3, in 90% of the cases it's very good to push a4, and it's now Van Velde again used this typical idea to block the move b4. And when white plays b4, black can take en passant, and now he can block the c-pawn. Okay, he went bishop c5, so now the c5 break is impossible for white, and it was very good for black to trade his a-pawn for the b-pawn. Now his pawn on b6, which could be potentially weak, is very well defended. The pawn on a3 is a target for him. He can go rook a8 to double on the a-file, and the d-pawn now, when the queen has moved, is released to be pushed maybe in some moment when needed. Now white is trying to exchange these bishops, and finally, because black wants to move now the knight in c6 or maybe to c8 or d6, and he needs to block the square f5, so now he can afford to play g6 when this bishop moved away from this diagonal, and he is not so dangerous for the king now. So black is controlling, you can see, almost all the squares in the center. Only d5 is not defended, but fortunately for black, the knight is far away from d5. So now rook f to d1, king to g7. This is a very typical way in which the strong players are improving by playing moves like g6, king g7. When you have slight advantage, but you cannot change something dramatically in your position, you can just slightly improve all your pieces, starting with the king, sometimes with some pawns, moving the rooks in a better positions, and just waiting to see what your opponent is going to do. And white don't have too many options. After rook d1, he already moved all his pieces in more or less the best possible positions. Probably the knight could be improved somehow if he can go to d3, but it will take a long time to go there. And he's trying, he's playing knight e2. Now, rook a8. Black understood that there is no need to stay on the d file. It's better to go to the a file and try to attack the pawn on a3. Now, if bishop takes, black can take even with the queen on c5. White is playing knight c2. Sorry, rook c2, and he wants to go knight c1 like I was thinking. Maybe this is the best possible plan, to go to d3. Black also is improving his knight, and white is staying, because now it would be good for white if black takes on b4 with anything, because then the pawn on a3 will move towards b4, and then once again c5 on the agenda, especially if you take with the knight, then c5 is coming very quickly. So black decided to attack the queen. And now white went queen a4, which is a very risky move, I think. But he didn't like probably the fact that if the queen retreats to somewhere to b2 or b1, the pawn on c4 could be potentially hanging. So let's say if you go queen to b2, maybe black can take here, and if you take with the pawn, knight c4 is some possibility, and then b5 is coming, and now black is with extra pawn. So he went queen a4, because now he is pinning the knight, and if you take after pawn takes, okay, white can... still black is not losing because queen c6, but white has a now good position. So after queen a4, black went immediately queen c6, and queen b5 was played. So now this is an important moment, because black has many options, and he has to choose the best one. He can take on b5, on b4, or he can play something else. But in general now, white wants to play knight to d3. And also bishop a5 could be some kind of threat, because the queen is hanging, and if you take on b5, he takes with the pawn. So then you have to take with the rook, and there will be knight b3. For example, if you play some move like this, I don't know what is going on in case of this move, and then here, and now you have to take with the rook, and then knight to b3 is coming, and then there are many exchanges. In the end of this line, the game is equal. So black has to defend, and he played rook to c7. Now it's putting pressure on the c pawn. White took on c6, and black took with the knight. So now already white has to defend knight d3. And probably here white thought that he has a good position, because he managed to protect everything, all the pawns and the bishop on b4. And now he can play rook to b1 on the next move to bring the king somewhere in the middle. And it's difficult to see what black can do, because this pawn is defended from the bishop, and even if you double the rooks, the bishop could stay here and you cannot take the pawn. Meanwhile, white wants to take on c5. So now black took on b4. It looks like this is good for white, because now he is improving his pawn structure. But after rook to a4, now these two pawns become a little bit weak. And for example, if b5, black can play here knight to b4 to exchange this very important knight, and without him, now white will struggle, because this pawn is weak, and this pawn is a pass pawn, so it seems that now white is losing a pawn. And that's why white played rook to b1 to defend the pawn. So now what to do? Both pawns are defended, and there is no point to bring back the knight, because he's not attacking anything. But black decided to attack the knight on d3. White moved the rook to defend it. And now black doubled on the a file. So he wants to play rook to a1, I suppose. h4 here, white made some space for the king to escape. But now black changed his plan, and he went rook to c3 to attack the pawn from behind. The only move is to go c5. And here a very crucial move is the move b5. And now suddenly white has too many weaknesses. The pawn of b4 could become weak because black can attack the knight 2 times, and also they can move the rook to attack the pawn on b4. So white went here f3 to protect the pawn. Black doubled the rook on the third rank to attack the knight, and the knight retreat to f2. So in the moment still white is defending everything, because if you bring one of the rooks to c4 or a4, he will bring the knight back to d3. That's why black has played some waiting move, h5. Now knight to b2. And now black played king f7. And this is maybe a bit strange that this was the last move in the game. Here black won. His position is winning, but I guess it was a bit premature for white to give up. The plan for black is to play here king d6 and then f5, and then depends what white do, but actually white cannot play too many moves because his rook has to stay here. The knight don't have any useful moves, so basically he can play only the king. And then after f5, king e6, black can push at some moment d3, knight d4. So he has a very, very big advantage. And also when the player is much better than the other one, like it was in this case, the result will be imminent. The other game which I want to show you is also between two good players. One of them is Anish Giri. He's even currently one of the top players in the world, against the Portuguese Luis Galego. This time the move order was from Scandinavian Defense. White went knight c3, and the things went into this line, which could be received from Scandinavian Defense. Also, this could happen in Scandinavian when white takes on d5, knight f6, and he plays knight to c3. Now black has to take. Usually white plays bishop to c4. And now the idea of white is to meet sometimes the move knight c3 with the move queen to f3, which is threatening close to a checkmate, and also the knight cannot escape. So Giri preferred to play c6, but not e6. This will close the bishop, but c6 is a bit better because then you can play the bishop to f5 or to g4. So now it looks like a bit like Caruana. Knight f3, and I think here black has to play either bishop f5, either bishop g4. He chose this move, h3, and here it's an interesting choice. Depends if you play for a draw or for a win, because many players who play for a draw are quite happy to go into this kind of positions, to trade his bishop and then to play e6. And this pawn structure e6 and c6 is very hard to break and quite easy to play for black, because he plays bishop to e7, castles, knight to d7, and then he has a very easy game. Queen c7, the rook's in the center, and for white it's very difficult to even to attack something. Black is very, very solid. But if you play for a win with black, maybe you'll prefer, like Anish Giri, to keep the bishop. So he went bishop h5. And this was the moment in which white has to choose to play more actively, to play the move d4, which is probably the most natural move, or to play more quiet and somehow solid move d3, and Gallego chose to play d3. Black has to play now e6, and here, instead of moving the king and make castle, white started to play some a little bit strange ideas. Okay, he played knight e4, which is okay, not a mistake, knight d7, and now he went, once again he should have castled, he went knight to g3. Okay, his plan was to move the knight from c3 to g3 in order to get rid of this very annoying pin, maybe, because he don't want to push g4, and if you don't push g4, actually this pin is quite annoying, because now maybe black could have played knight e5 at some moment. So maybe, okay, it has some idea to bring the knight back, although white is losing 2 tempos now. And here Giri has found interesting idea. Instead of moving the bishop back to g6, first he make the move bishop to b4 check. And now, in case of c3, seems like black should be losing. But he is not. He has a choice between the most solid bishop f3, and maybe now even knight e5 could be played, or simply to retreat with the bishop to e7. And also interesting is knight takes c3, although it's a bit risky to play something like this. And now bishop f3, and then okay, if he takes with a pawn, you can take the exchange, but white has 2 pieces for a rook and a pawn, so it's a bit unclear. But instead of playing c3 or even bishop d2, I think it was some option, although in this case bishop f3 is coming, and after queen takes, white will lose his castle. So I think this was a move which maybe black prepared, and white underestimated when he moved the knight to g3. It was an unexpected move, and in the end Gallego decided to play the king to f1, which is already a good news for black, because now obviously it will be a bit difficult for white to move the king into a good position and to connect the rooks. So black already has maybe slight advantage. Now queen e2 was played, and the bishop went back to e7. This is a bit unexpected move. Probably, okay, castle was looking more natural, but I think this is against some kind of plans with bishop g5 or h4, h5. So black is waiting to see maybe if white will push the h pawn. But white is first developing the bishop to d2. a5. This is, I suppose, with the idea to push b5 and to chase the bishop now if he goes to b3 to play a4, and to force white to take on d5, which will be good for black. So now white is pushing the h-pawn. So b5 will be a mistake, because now after bishop takes, and then h5 is coming, and black has to play this move, which is ruining his center. He has to double his pawns. So he has to lose 1 tempo to play h6 in order to have the retreat for the bishop to h7 in case of h5. Now, a bit surprising to me, white decided to take on d5. I think this is probably a mistake, because now for black it's more easy, bishop d5. And even, okay, white could have waited until black is attacking his bishop and then to take. He takes immediately. He could have played something, I don't know, king g1 or rook e1 or something more useful. Pawn takes, c takes d5. Bishop c3. Obviously this was the plan for white when he eliminated this knight. He wanted to improve his bishop on this big diagonal and to take this outpost for the knight. Now finally it's time to castle. And now I don't have anything. h5, just bishop h7. He played a4, which has the idea to block the pawns like this, to leave this pawn on dark squares, so she could be potentially a weakness. But now rook c8, black is showing that actually he wants to use the c file for the rook. And if possible, ideally, black would try to prepare the move e5. Maybe he can move the bishop to f6 or to d6, and then to push e5, d4, to attack this bishop, and then to attack the pawn on c2. So now h5 is played, bishop h7, and white played the move knight to d4. I suppose he wanted to bring the knight to b5 to use this good outpost. Bishop f6, but this makes for black more easy to push e5 when the knight leaves his position. Now the problem for white is that this knight is on g3, not on f3. If he was on f3, and then he could have played g3, king g2, rook e1, but now it's difficult to bring the king to somewhere to the second rank and to connect the rooks. So he went knight to b5, and now black is playing e5. And here you can notice something very interesting about the positions of the white knights. The knight from b1 went to c3, e4, g3, and the knight from g1 went to b5. Instead of doing the opposite, he could have played knight e2, knight g3, 2 moves, and knight c3, knight b5, 2 moves. He made, I don't know, 10 moves with the knights, lost so much time to get these positions for his knights. And now white decided to play one active move, knight d6, but I think he's losing the plot here. He should try to do something about the king. He keeps playing with these knights, and all the time black is improving. For the last 2 moves, you see white has moved his knight here, and black managed to play bishop f6, e5. Now he plays knight to d6, attacking the rook and the pawn. Maybe he thought that this is a very clever move, because now rook c7 is impossible because of bishop a5. Rook b8 looks very passive. But black went rook to c6. I suppose this came as a surprise to Gallego, because he thought that he can take on b7. But after queen to b6 to c7, knight to a5, for example, rook takes c3, pawn takes queen a5, and now black has 2 pieces for rook and a few pawns, but the pawns are very weak. So black will play rook to c8, he will take this pawn on c3, then the other pawn is very weak, the knight can go to attack it. Once you take the pawn on c3, you can start attacking the c2 pawn. So these 2 bishops are very, very strong. The knight is very bad, the rook is out of play, the king is in a bad position, so this will be a very good position for black. And then white was forced to move once again his knight, so he didn't want to concede that this was a mistake to go back. So he tried to go to f5 to justify this move knight d6, but knight f5 is obviously a little bit shaky here, the position of the knight. Now, like I said earlier, black wants to push d4, so he managed to prepare all his ideas. Now the bishop has to retreat to e1, so the queen could protect the pawn. And now black has to find a good plan. He has actually many possibilities. He decided to play a bit strange move. I suppose maybe Giri was maybe wanted to prevent against queen g4 and then knight h6 ideas, so he moved the king to h8, just in case that his opponent plays queen g4, so he can now capture the pawn on c2. And also he realized that white actually don't have any useful moves. The knights are stacked here, he cannot move any of the knights, the rook as well, the other rook, nothing he can do. The bishop has to stay here, the queen has to protect the pawn, So not so many possibilities. So white went king to g1. And now rook to e8. Black is just slowly improving. And as I said earlier, yes, in the end, white came to this conclusion that the king has to go to h2, so he can somehow connect the rooks. Now the problem is the pawn on c2. And here after king h2, actually there was another problem, bishop g5, and now suddenly this knight is in big danger because black wants to play bishop f4, and then he wants to take the knight or even to attack it with the queen. Now he has many ideas, rook f6, queen f6, and then even g6, because actually if you attack the knight with g6, he don't have anywhere to go. So you see this knight went from f3 to d4, b5, d6, f5. He lost 5 moves, only in the end to be probably taken from the black. Bishop d2 was played, and now, okay, rook c2, they could be bishop g5, but black simply took the bishop. Then he went queen f6, and suddenly the knight is lost. So this was the end of the journey of the knights in this game for white. So black won very easy and comfortably this game. And let's take a look now at one more game. This game was played in a very high level, the Russian Cup final, and between two very good players, Pavel Pankratov and Denis Hizmatulin. So the move order once again was interesting. Knight c3 first move, and knight f6. So now e4, d5, and white has played e5, switching the game to this deviation of Alekhine defense. Like I said, now black can play knight e4, knight g4, d4, knight d7. He chose to play d4. White went knight to e2. And now instead of knight e4, which we have seen in the preview, black is playing another interesting line, knight to g4, attacking the pawn on e5. White has to defend the pawn. And now black is keep developing c5. So this is something like some close Sicilian maybe, because after e4, c5, let's say f4, d5, there is such a line, knight c3, d4, knight e2. So it could be achieved from maybe some kind of Sicilian defense with some move orders. Knight f3. And here there is something very interesting about this position. White is delaying the move d3, because then the knight can jump to e3. Now he wants to play h3, knight h6, and probably even g4. So often when this knight goes to g4, white wants to go h3 and g4, so he can actually close the knight on h6, and then the knight cannot go to f5. So if white can go g4 and the knight is stuck on h6, usually this knight is in a bad position. So black is playing this move now, h5, which looks a little bit strange if you don't know the ideas, but actually the idea is to prevent the move g4. So if white plays now h3, knight h6, and now white cannot play g4, and even later when, let's say, he plays d3, black can go back to f5. So this is a very, very good position for the knight. He can jump to e3. Now he wants to play h4, knight g3. He has many ideas. So once again, white don't want to play d3. So he plays the move b4, which is very, very interesting for white. The idea is to take the pawn on c5 and to take on d4. If black takes here, white will take the pawn, and then he has a very nice center, because then he can move the knight away to b3, let's say, and then to push d4. But black also had an interesting reply against b4, and he moved d3. So if pawn takes. Okay, black can take on b4, but even he can go maybe knight to c6 and then knight to b4 to attack on d3. He has many options. And white continued to play interesting. He played knight to g3, just developing his knight. Now black has to take, and white is also developing the queen, attacking the pawn. So black has to take as well. So this way white is sacrificing the pawn, but he managed to develop the knight to g3, the queen, and the bishop on c4, and he has good compensation for the pawn. Black now is trying to develop e6, and he wants to play maybe g6 to prevent this possible f5 break. And here white decided to play immediately f5, which is maybe a bit risky. He could have played bishop b2 first, castle, or h3, but f5 immediately is putting a pressure on the pawn on e6. So now the plan is to take on e6, and then when you take with the bishop, to take with the bishop, pawn takes, and then queen g6 check, which more or less forces black to take on f5. Now white can take the pawn on f5 with a knight, but he prefers to push d4, so he's temporary with 2 pawns down. But he's relying that he has a very good development, so now he wants to move the bishop to g5 maybe, to castle somewhere, and then to start pushing the pawns in the middle until the king is on e8. So black went bishop e6. He's trying to stop this possible dangerous initiative on the diagonal, because maybe even queen b3 was in the air. Castle now. And black is hurried to develop his pieces. So knight c6, he wants to bring the rook and also to attack the pawn on d4. And now white decided to defend. He went rook d1. Bishop b2 was impossible because of knight e3. So he has to move the rook. And black managed to develop in time the rook now. So now already there are some threats like knight a5. So the bishop is hanging. There is the pin, very annoying for white. And he decided to push d5. This is a line which black has to calculate very precisely what is going on. Queen to b6 check. King h1 is not possible because now knight f2 check. So black has to, okay, white has to go king f1. Now knight a5. So now both kings are in danger. The king on e8, because if any check comes, it might be fatal. And as well the king on f1, because if the queen leaves, it will be queen f2 mate. So now the bishop is hanging. Queen f4 is not working because of bishop d7. And white has to take. Now black takes with a knight. Threatening knight e3 check. White takes on f7. And now king takes. And I think this was the moment when maybe white thought initially that this is good for him, because now he has queen f5. Check. Also attacking the rook. Well, the problem is that after king to g8, now queen f2 checkmate is hanging, and as well knight e3 check is hanging. So there is no defense actually. If you defend somehow f2, then knight e3, so you cannot defend both squares, f2 and e3. That's why now white has moved the king to e1 to defend against this check. But of course the king is in a very now bad position in the center. And now black decided simply to retreat with the king. He didn't want to play g6, and now queen f5 is not possible because of the checkmate. Knight f5, this is the only move for white, but it was another surprise for him. Here black went b3. You cannot take with the queen because of checkmate, and black wants to play bishop to b4 check. In case of pawn takes, bishop b4 check. This was his plan. And now if you move the king, knight e3 check, is losing the queen. If any piece on d2, then queen f2 checkmate. So queen e2 was played. And now after b2, black is winning a piece. So here white could have already, I think, resigned, but he kept playing for a while. e6 was played. Now the things went into an endgame with an extra bishop for black. The pawn is stopped. Knight g5, g6, knight d4, bishop h6, knight e4, and black simply develops here. Bishop g7, he wants to exchange some pieces. Rook c1, knight e3 was played, rook to d3, knight f5 now, and now finally after this move, pawn takes f5, white decided to resign. So it was a very nice and interesting game, very sharp position in which black emerged as a winner after finding these ideas, bishop e6, rook c8 in the opening and queen b6, and suddenly white was attacking his king, but after queen b6 the white king went into a danger zone, and eventually black managed to win the game. So I hope you have enjoyed this video, and see you next time.